Soviet troops stormed into the bunker and confirmed not only the fall of the Third Reich, but also the death of Adolf Hitler himself. For nearly 80 years, the world believed that Hitler's underground bunker had been sealed forever, hidden beneath Berlin and erased from history. Yet in 2024, a team of experts was finally allowed to enter. What they uncovered stunned even the most experienced investigators. A group of French researchers received rare permission to study fragments believed to be Hitler's remains, including part of his jaw and dentures. The bunker walls still stood strong, the air inside was still poisoned, but nothing could have prepared them or the world for what lay waiting. Tests proved beyond doubt that the teeth were Hitler's, matching perfectly with his preserved dental records from his personal dentist. By early 1945, Berlin was crumbling under relentless attacks. Soviet tanks pressed from the east, Allied bombers hammered from the skies, and the Third Reich was collapsing. During these final desperate months, Hitler disappeared from public view. He was not in hiding in some distant land. He was literally buried beneath Berlin in a concrete fortress. The Führer bunker was not just a shelter. It was a last command center, built deep under the Reich Chancellery. Construction began in 2 phases. The first phase, known as the Vorbunker, was built in 1936 as a simple underground refuge. But as Germany's defeat grew certain, Hitler demanded something far stronger, deeper, and completely bomb-proof. By 1943, a new phase began requiring secrecy and speed. Forced laborers, many of them Soviet prisoners of war and political prisoners from nearby camps, were made to work under brutal conditions. Food was scarce, beatings were common, and workers who slowed down or collapsed were often shot. Hitler himself rarely visited the construction site, but when he did, his temper exploded. Engineers recalled him screaming over ventilation flaws and demanding walls thick enough to withstand the apocalypse. When one wall was discovered to be thinner than his orders required, he slammed his fists on the blueprints and threatened to execute the lead engineer unless the mistake was corrected. The final structure was buried more than 8 meters below ground, with concrete walls and ceilings nearly 4 meters thick, able to withstand direct aerial bombardment. Inside were 18 rooms connected by narrow corridors, each secured by steel doors. It was equipped with electric generators, diesel fuel reserves, chemical toilets, water pumps, and air filtration systems in case of gas attacks. Hitler's personal quarters included a private study, a laboratory, and an emergency exit. No windows, no sunlight, only heavy plaster walls designed to reduce echoes. In January 1945, Hitler moved in permanently. With him were Joseph Goebbels, Martin Bormann, Eva Braun, several SS guards, secretaries and aides. Day after day, Hitler issued impossible orders to divisions that no longer existed, screamed at his generals, and clung to fantasies of victory while the empire collapsed above him. On April 29, just hours before Soviet forces entered Berlin, Hitler married Eva Braun in a brief midnight ceremony. The following day, April 30th, they both killed themselves. Their bodies were doused with fuel and burned, but only partially. When Soviet soldiers entered, they found chaos, scattered belongings, bloodstains, and silence. In 1947, the Soviets tried to demolish the site with explosives, but large parts of the bunker survived. Later, East Germany built apartments over the ruins, sealed the entrance, and scrubbed any public record of its exact location. For decades, no one was allowed back inside. The world moved on, while beneath Berlin the bunker remained, hidden in silence. Then, in 2024, a new team of researchers was finally allowed access. They studied the remains and fragments left behind, confirming grim details that had long been buried in mystery. The secrecy surrounding the site began immediately after the war. Soviet forces quickly seized control of the bunker in May 1945. Officially, they said they were securing the area, but in reality, they were erasing it. Within days, they had descended into the ruins, photographing bloodstains, collecting documents, and taking fragments of bones. But much of what they removed was never revealed. Soviet reports claimed Hitler's remains were recovered, examined, and burned again. Yet the records were often inconsistent, sometimes delayed, and in many cases deliberately misleading. The question that lingers is why? Why was so much hidden? Why was the site covered up for decades? And what secrets, if any, still lie beneath the soil of Berlin? Stalin never confirmed Hitler's death to the world, even though his own investigators were almost certain he had died in the bunker. Instead, he allowed rumors to spread that Hitler might have escaped. This fueled confusion and suspicion across Europe and beyond. In 1945, Soviet teams reportedly removed not only personal belongings from the bunker, but also secret files, coded communications, and several small boxes whose contents remain unknown to this day. None of these items were ever made public. By 1946, the Soviet secret police, later replaced by the KGB, had sealed off the entire site. Declassified East German intelligence records reveal that KGB officers remained in Berlin during the late 1940s with one specific mission: to suppress all knowledge of the bunker. Some accounts suggest they were ordered to retrieve Hitler's final letters and communications. Others hint at something far stranger, something so disturbing that even the Soviets did not want it revealed. Years later, construction workers uncovered a hidden chamber connected to the bunker, one that had never appeared on official blueprints. It had been sealed from the inside. Soviet documents never mentioned this room, and no photographs exist. Why was it ignored? Was it overlooked by accident, or deliberately hidden? German engineers who had worked on the bunker's construction later admitted that not every section was explored by Soviet troops. They recalled locked steel doors and compartments designed to be airtight, impossible to breach without proper equipment. Yet Soviet reports claimed every part of the bunker had been cleared. The conflicting accounts only deepened the mystery. By the 1970s, East Germany launched a campaign to erase the site completely. Bulldozers tore down the last surface structures. The main entrance was filled with rubble and concrete. Maps were altered so the coordinates would not point to the bunker. Apartments were built directly on top, and the public was told nothing. No memorials, no signs, not even academic research was permitted. The government claimed this was to prevent neo-Nazis from gathering there, which seemed logical on the surface. But if that were the only reason, why such secrecy? Why conflicting records? Why did no one explain what happened to the classified items removed by Soviet troops? When researchers were finally allowed into the remains of the site in 2024, they discovered more than ruins. They uncovered evidence of things the world was never meant to see. Even as Soviet soldiers first secured the area in 1945, whispers had spread among them. Some claimed that while clearing collapsed tunnels, they found scattered human bones. Scraps of uniform suggested these might have been officers, but others believed the remains belonged to children. None of this ever appeared in official Soviet reports. Still, the rumor survived among veterans for decades. More chilling claims emerged from East German workers in the 1970s and 1980s. While carrying out redevelopment projects, some said they found scratch marks etched deep into the bunker walls. They believed the marks came from fingernails, not tools. In faint writing, words like Verloren, which means lost, and Nade, meaning mercy, could be seen. Another worker said he was ordered to seal off a chamber that was not in the blueprints. Inside were candle stubs arranged in a circle and a dark stain on the floor that resembled dried blood. When they reported what they had seen, no one responded. They were simply told to finish their work and keep silent. Even residents living above the site spoke of strange experiences. Some said they heard muffled voices underground. Others swore they heard screams rising up through the pavement late at night. Authorities dismissed these claims as superstition, but people in the area avoided walking too close to the site. Even today, older Berliners say the ground feels unnaturally heavy, as if the events of 1945 still echo beneath it. Historians and psychologists later examined these stories and suggested they reflected the overwhelming trauma of Berlin's last days. One specialist called the bunker a psychological sinkhole, a place where the despair and madness of the Nazi regime had been burned into the very walls. Whether the scratches, bones, and hidden chambers were real or exaggerated hardly mattered. The fact that so many people believed them gave the bunker a lasting aura of dread. These scattered testimonies fueled the legend of something darker sealed beneath Berlin, and they became one of the main reasons modern experts demanded to re-enter the site. After nearly 8 decades, they finally did. In 2024, teams located a partially collapsed access shaft hidden under a broken sidewalk near the old Reich Chancellery. At first, only a small hole could be used to send in a drone. The remote device revealed what they feared most. The air was toxic and the structure unstable. Still, after months of preparation, reinforcement, and ventilation, the team went inside. Even with protective suits and breathing gear, the first steps were overwhelming. The air was thick with decay. Mold clung to every surface. The walls were wet and dripping. Pools of stagnant water spread across the floors, and broken ceiling beams forced experts to crawl through certain passages. The temperature was unnaturally cold, as if the space had been frozen in time. Then they reached the preserved chambers. Some rooms looked almost exactly as they had in April 1945. Metal-framed chairs were still in place. On one table sat rusted utensils and the remains of a ration tin hardened with age. On a wall, the shredded remains of a map of Berlin still clung, yellowed and peeling, but recognizable. In Hitler's quarters, they found a small cot tucked in a corner with a wool blanket still resting on top, untouched since the day the bunker was abandoned. The fabric on the cot in Hitler's quarters carried a dark stain near the headrest, and testing showed it was dried blood. The sheet beneath it had never been touched. The conditions inside were so dangerous that the experts could only remain for short shifts of about 15 minutes. Air samples revealed spore levels 10 times higher than safe limits, and chemical residue suggested traces of explosives and poisons still lingered in the air. In some rooms, the floor shifted under their weight, while in others the walls bowed inward, ready to collapse. Yet the documentation continued. Every corridor, every object, every remaining surface was photographed, scanned, and carefully recorded. The emotional toll was severe. A historian vomited after entering Hitler's quarters. Another stood completely still in shock for nearly 10 minutes, unable to move. A structural engineer emerged from the communication room pale and shaking, describing the experience as a descent into death. Others said the silence was unbearable, as if the bunker itself was listening. It felt like a place too stubborn to disappear, trapped in its own failure. But these horrors were only the beginning. The deeper the team went, the more disturbing the discoveries became. The last rooms were not just historical ruins, they were the final environment that Adolf Hitler himself controlled. The shock came not from the absence of objects, but from what had remained undisturbed for almost 80 years. The leaders' quarters were hidden behind thick steel doors at the far end of the bunker. Inside, the team discovered the shattered remains of Hitler's desk. Though partially collapsed, it still held a cracked drawer filled with scraps of burned paper. Torn maps littered the floor, one of Berlin covered in hand-drawn notations in red pencil, another showing a divided post-war Europe with lines marking the territories of the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union. These maps suggested Hitler had already accepted defeat and was obsessively following the inevitable outcome. Hanging crooked on the wall was a broken portrait of Frederick the Great, Hitler's idol, its glass smashed inward as though it had been struck during a violent outburst. The most unsettling object in the room was a decayed couch, its frame sagging and covered in mold. Near the top edge of the fabric was a large bloodstain that tests later confirmed belonged to Hitler. This was almost certainly the very spot where he and Eva Braun ended their lives on April 30, 1945. The scene was not ceremonial or symbolic. It was abrupt, chaotic, and final. A few meters away, the communication room lay partly collapsed. Tangled wires hung down like vines, and heaps of burned radio parts lined one wall. In a sealed cabinet, the team uncovered Morse code transmission logs dated from April 28 to April 30. Many were marked classified. The last entry was chillingly clear. No departure. End procedure confirmed. For analysts, this was proof that Hitler never intended to escape. His death in the bunker had always been the plan. Personal items deepened the emotional impact. On a table sat dented ration tins dated just days before the suicide. In an ashtray fused to the table's surface were 2 half-smoked cigarettes. Beside them lay a pair of wire-rimmed glasses later identified as belonging to Joseph Goebbels. In a corner of what appeared to be the staff quarters, investigators found a child's stuffed rabbit. It was faded, missing an ear, and stained with what looked like dried blood. Experts could not confirm the owner, but many believed it belonged to one of Goebbels' children, who were poisoned by their parents inside the bunker. When experts began analyzing what these discoveries revealed, the findings were deeply unsettling. Blood samples from the couch showed high levels of cyanide and traces of barbiturates, matching long-standing reports that Hitler took poison before shooting himself. The same testing confirmed that Eva Braun had died solely from cyanide. Chemical residue found nearby contained traces of nerve agents, likely stored as a last resort by Hitler's medical staff. For investigators, this was more than biological proof. It confirmed that suicide was always part of the plan. Psychologists studying the bunker's layout noted how obsessively organized everything was. Even in the final days, ration stores were perfectly stacked, furniture was placed at deliberate angles, and documents were filed with precision. This obsessive control suggested Hitler clung to small details while his empire crumbled, desperate to maintain authority over something as the larger world slipped from his grasp. The maps told an even darker story. Red arrows traced counterattacks that were no longer possible. Handwritten notes, verified as Hitler's, were scrawled in the margins. One chilling phrase read, "Nicht Übelben. Sie werden nicht übelben. Do not survive. They will not survive." The meaning was unclear. Some believed it was directed at the Allies. Others thought it was meant for his own people, a final demand for destruction. Either way, it revealed a leader fighting phantom battles long after reality had abandoned him. Even more disturbing were the religious notes found scribbled on scraps of paper. Some compared Germany's fall to divine punishment, while others referenced final purification. Analysts recognized echoes of Hitler's earlier speeches, but here the words felt like scripture, as though he believed he was fulfilling some divine prophecy. One psychologist described it as messianic delusion, a final attempt to recast himself not as a failed dictator, but as a martyr destined to fall with his nation. The most unsettling discovery came from notes believed to have been written by Joseph Goebbels himself. These pages described his decision to kill his 6 children, not out of fear, but as a twisted act of mercy. In one line he wrote, "They will never live under Jewish vengeance." Experts confirmed the handwriting, and the meaning was horrifyingly clear. Instead of ending speculation, these notes reignited old conspiracies about what truly happened in those final days. The evidence uncovered inside the bunker should have been enough to close the book on Adolf Hitler's death. The maps, the bloodstains, the transmission logs, and the remains all pointed to one conclusion. Hitler died in that bunker. But when Soviet forces took control of the site in 1945, they planted the first seeds of doubt. Instead of confirming his death, Joseph Stalin suggested to both U.S. President Harry Truman and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill that Hitler might have escaped. This claim wasn't whispered in secret. It was declared openly, despite the fact that Soviet investigators had already recovered remains, including skull fragments and dental evidence, strongly suggesting Hitler's death. Rather than share this with the world, Soviet propaganda spread stories that Hitler had fled, perhaps to Spain, Argentina, or even Japan. Rumors grew of underground escape tunnels, hidden submarines, and secret aircraft. These tales spread rapidly, and Western intelligence agencies became overwhelmed with reports of supposed sightings. Some swore he was living in South America under a false identity. Others insisted he had undergone surgery and was hiding in Asia. By the 1950s, conspiracy theories had taken deep root. Stories of Hitler using a body double to stage his death became popular. Witnesses near the bunker claimed the body they saw being burned didn't match Hitler's appearance, while others described small differences in height and facial structure. Without open access to Soviet forensic evidence, even respected journalists began to question the truth. The lack of transparency gave conspiracy theorists endless space to rewrite history. It wasn't until 1968 that Soviet officials quietly admitted they had recovered Hitler's dental remains, which matched X-rays secretly obtained from his personal dentist. Even then, they refused to release photographs or detailed reports. Decades later, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russian officials finally allowed Western forensic experts to examine the skull and jawbone. Testing confirmed the match beyond doubt. But by that time, conspiracy theories had spread so far that many refused to accept the truth. Neo-Nazi groups and extremist movements only fueled the confusion, clinging to the fantasy that Hitler had survived. Underground publications and online forums recycled old lies, twisting them into books, documentaries, and even television programs. Each time new evidence emerged, fresh conspiracies grew to replace the old. Myths survived because they gave people a sense of control. They allowed believers to imagine there was always more to the story, something hidden just beyond reach. And because of Soviet secrecy and manipulation, those myths became nearly impossible to erase. Now that the bunker has been entered again, the world faces a difficult choice. The team recovered physical evidence, psychological insight, and undeniable historical proof. What they did not recover was closure. Germany's government has not released a full report, and there are no official plans to turn the site into a public memorial. Some leaders argue that doing so would risk inspiring extremists. Others warn that silence only strengthens the very conspiracy movements already twisting the truth. The bunker's rooms, the stained documents, and the preserved personal belongings are no longer just relics of history. They are political flashpoints. Historians who participated in the excavation believe leaving the bunker sealed again would only allow denial to grow stronger. They argue for a controlled exhibit focused on education, not spectacle, a place where the truth is shown openly, so false narratives lose their power. The artifacts uncovered may be fragile, but the truth they carry is not. History does not vanish simply because it is uncomfortable. If the findings remain hidden in academic reports and government vaults, the lessons of the past may fade, and when they do, humanity risks repeating its darkest mistakes. The question now is whether the world is ready to face the full weight of what was discovered, or whether it will continue to turn away. What do you believe about Hitler's death? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you'd like to see more powerful and eye-opening stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching until the end. We'll see you in the next video.